Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for our Combating Assumptions About Multi-Generational Diversity webinar sponsored by the Diversity Movement. I'm Megan Hockaday, and I will be handling the logistics and helping with Q&A at the end of our conversation today. But for now, I am going to disappear for a minute and let our host take it from here. Kurt, it's all yours.
Thanks, Megan. I'm Kurt Merriweather. I head up products and partnerships with the Diversity Movement. Today, my guest is Will Barfield, President and CEO of Barfield Revenue Consulting, a full services organization focused on sales consulting and talent acquisition. Will is the leader in sales and marketing talent placement, including sales coaching, consulting, training, and all facets of business tied to generating revenue, which is why he named the company Barfield Revenue Consulting. Will has worked in sales for his entire career, has begun his journey into talent placement and with sales leadership and recruiting. He's an active member of Raleigh's Society of Human Resources Management, or affectionately known as SHRM, the local chapter here, and has worked his way onto the board by helping to jumpstart Raleigh's Metro Young Professionals effort, a networking group that is successfully involved into their Emerging Leaders program. So we're really excited to have you today, Will. Thank you for joining us.
Thrilled to be here.
There are a few housekeeping items that we want to take care of right now. So you know this is how we're going to do this today. So this is going to be interview style so we can make it as engaging as possible. We want to be able to answer your questions on the topic that we're covering today, which is about multi-generational diversity. And we want to dive into that topic. And so while you'll be muted during the conversation today, we want you to use your Q&A feature throughout. So as questions come up, you can start to ask those and we'll start to build those over time. And we'll try to answer as many of those live as we can during the flow of the discussion. Secondly, we're going to use the chat feature for your participation during the hour as well. So the Q&A we'll be doing at the end of the session. The chat will be responding to just as if we were together in the same room. And so we're really excited about having that level of interactivity. We want to make sure that this is an interactive discussion. And so we want this to feel like we're all having this discussion together in the same place. If you happen to be talking about the webinar itself on social media, please use the hashtag the Diversity Movement, all one word, and tag us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you're spending your time with us at lunch, and hopefully you had an opportunity to grab something to eat or drink, feel free to do that and let us provide some education for you as you go through the hour. And we hope that this gives you some new perspectives in terms of diversity and inclusion as you think about your own work. We want to make sure that this is an environment where we have transparent conversations as well. So in some of your conversation, if there are things that make you uncomfortable, feel free to use the anonymous chat feature if that's something that you want to do, but you want to ask a pretty hard-hitting question. We want to make sure the discussion is compassionate and that we have the right dialogue. So we want to make sure that we're having a responsible discussion around the things that we're talking about today, but we do want to press forward a little bit in terms of making sure that we're having honest conversation. And so Will is very well acquainted with the issues we're talking about today, and I'm really excited about his perspective as we dive into this topic. Before we get started, though, we're going to put together a quick poll so that we can see who's on the call. We want to make sure that we have a good sense of who's on the call today so that we can tailor some of our discussion or comments around who's on the discussion today. And looking at the results so far as they're coming in, we have a pretty good mix of just about everybody. And so we'll have a pretty good wide-ranging discussion from talking about this topic from a leadership perspective, whether you're an HR professional or D&I professional. You could be somebody who's in marketing or in some other fields. And so with that, let's get started. And so Will, why is diversity and inclusion so important today for recruiting and retaining talent?
That's a great question, Kurt. And, lots of thoughts flow through my head when you ask that. I'd say, I'm going to try to speak to this from two perspectives. One is the business owner, right? And, how he has built his own teams before. And then the external third-party recruiter who is tasked with helping companies build their teams and has to work that fine line between serving the client, serving the candidate, and trying to do what's best for the marketplace as well, right? Which is it's an interesting zone to play in. It's a very gray space. When I had thought about the way that we built Barfield Revenue Consulting and the staff on our squad, what was most important to me from a D&I lens was that we not only looked like our marketplace, that we reflected the diversity and variety of talent and cultural things that were available in the area, that we mirrored that ourselves. But I also wanted to, if I'm going to go to clients and talk about helping them with great hiring and having an eye on diversity and inclusion, and then they come look at us on the web and they check out my staff on LinkedIn and we don't appear diverse, then I'm not representing the message that I'm putting forward. So try to be really mindful of that. And we have a very diverse marketplace here. We've got folks from all over the country that move here for quality of life, for career opportunities, for education, for other things. It's a very internationally and culturally diverse area. And as all of us evolve forward as companies and hiring managers and leaders, we got to make sure that we're building diverse workplaces that embrace all the talent that's out there too.
Right. So there seems like there's certainly a cost of not doing that well. And so, what are some of the things that might happen if you're not thinking about recruiting and retaining diverse talent? And that's diversity across all dimensions, whether it's multi-generational, multicultural, the way you think, all those different kinds of things. What are some of the challenges that organizations face if they don't do that well?
Well, talent hat on. We've worked with candidates before who, diversity is important to them. And we've said, hey, we'd love for you to take a look at this, excellent client. Here's a great job. Here's a job description. This is what you're looking for. Oh, sounds great. Then they go and look at the company online and they're like, look, they don't appear as diverse as an environment as where I really want to work. And, I just don't know if that's the right setting for me. Or I'm reading some things online from a review standpoint that don't reflect, my take on D&I, and it's, that's, I don't think I'm going to fit in. So it can actually be an inhibitor to recruiting and to the brand value if you don't reflect the marketplace, or if you've got these great missions and values posted on your website and they're not reflected in the personnel on the team. So I'm not saying that I encounter that a lot, but it happens, and that's an impact. Right. So it can also mean that if you do not have a diverse environment that's inclusive and embraces all walks of life and cultures, you may be a victim of someone like me recruiting that talent away and putting them in an environment that's more diverse, is more conducive to the type of place that they want to work. So you can be vulnerable not only to attraction, but also to attrition, if you're not thoughtful about the way that you handle D&I.
Right. That's a really powerful insight, is that there's certainly the cost of not doing something well.
Well, they want to fit in. They want to feel like part of the team. Right. Today's employee is looking for, they recognize that they're at work more than they're at home, when we're not in the stay-at-home orders, right? And the people that I'm around and interacting with, I really want to enjoy them. I want to enjoy my work. I want to enjoy the environment. And if I'm spending 75% of my life every week there, if it's not, checking all the boxes for me professionally, culturally, and experientially, there are other options out there, and it can be something that significantly impacts your team.
And how do you see this based on the generation you belong to, in terms of what that impact could be? depending on, whether you're in the traditionalist, which is we have 5 generations in the workplace now. So there's the traditionalist that's been in the workplace the longest, baby boomer, Gen Xer, millennial, and Gen Z. Those are the 5 generations that are in the workforce. And so how does that impact each of those groups a little bit differently in terms of what you just were mentioning?
Right. So really thoughtful question. I've been in the business since '04. So this is my 16th year in the recruiting and staffing realm. And when I first got into the business, this was really not a hot button factor. Just wasn't. Different generation dominating, the majority of the employee base at that point. This was not landing on the radar screen of the traditionalist. And it was starting to be something that kind of impacted the younger, Gen Xers and was starting to be part of their thought process when it wasn't really landing with the boomers and the traditionalists. And now that our work population is heavier on, early, the latter stages of the Gen X and then millennial. And now, the Gen Z, is that the one that's coming? Forgive this.
Gen Z is the youngest generation in the workforce right now.
Much, much more of a determining factor in how they make a decision on where they want to work and what they want to do, right? So, if we just talk not just about D&I, but why I make a decision to take a job. Let's look at boomer, right? So in the boomers that I interact with as a recruiter, it's going to be about compensation and, company stability. And, I'm going to go in and work hard and be rewarded for it. And I'm going to go do my thing. And I may have a phone screen after that one with a millennial. And it's like, well, talk to me about the work-life balance there, and talk to me about flexible hours, and talk to me about their diversity initiatives. Do they have a volunteer cause that they support? Do they, we get out in the community and contribute and do things? Not at all factors that are going to be part of a conversation with a traditionalist by any stretch, or with most of the time. It's much more of a younger generation determining factor, which is great because we need to be looking at recruiting and onboarding and team building through that D&I lens. And it's really the workforce that's, starting to dominate overall and that's coming, that are the ones who are going to be pushing that initiative forward more so than ever before.
Right. And so what you were really starting to get into was the difference in expectations, difference in values that different generations have. And so when you put all those groups together in the workplace, then that can create some challenges. And so as we start unfolding this particular topic, it's really what we would describe as generational bias.
Right.
And so how do those generational biases come together in the workplace in a way that impacts it either negatively or positively? But primarily, as we think about the generational biases that we have, how does that create challenges in that workplace?
Well, when you think about, generations, most of the time, as you think about how they're stacked in terms of age, the different ones that you mentioned, they also tend to be stacked that way in leadership capacity inside org, right? Further along in career, higher up most of the time. So a lot of times there'll be a mirror from the generational structure as well as the management leadership structure internally. Not always, but majority of the time. So it depends how that impacts the organization, depends on, who's making those decisions around culture, mission, values, diversity, inclusion. And are you empowering those folks that are of the more forward-thinking generations to make those choices and champion those things? Or are you coming at it from a traditional or maybe later boomer perspective and, forgive the cliche, but, are you being old school about the way that you do things and therefore making it harder to, stretch the organization in, ways that might be uncomfortable initially, but so that you embrace more diversity and inclusion. So it can cause some friction internally if leadership happens to have, and I'm not saying traditionalist in terms of the generation level, but if leadership has a more traditional and or conservative view on the way that things should be done, don't ask questions, just do the work. Your value is based on your production. Your merit is based on years of service, right? And these things that aren't necessarily aligned with, are we out in the community volunteering, and do we have work-life balance, and are we, being diversity and inclusion thoughtful when it comes to the way that we manage our people internally. So the organizations that I've seen perform better with regard to retention of talent, to being relatively unassailable from outside, meaning it's hard for me as a third-party recruiter to go and take Kurt away from Walt West because he's like, why would I leave this place? Those companies that are like that tend to be ones where either leadership is very forward-thinking or part of, the generation where, they're more apt to embrace some of these more modern day thoughts, or the traditional leadership is empowering levels below them to listen to the employees and listen to the market and create a work environment that doesn't have internal friction because of generational bias. I also see generational bias externally when I'm recruiting and trying to, help people hire. So I don't know, depending on what you want to kick open next, we can dig into that too.
Right. So there's certainly different expectations when you enter into the workforce. And so for folks who are in younger generations, the expectation is that I want to have an impact immediately.
Yes.
And then you've got folks who've been in the career force for a long time where it was more of a linear path where there was a career ladder. There was something that was more linear. And so you have to be in this role for 15 years before you have the opportunity to have a seat at the table. And so those two different thought processes create friction.
Yes.
And so for organizations to be successful in managing that, it's important to understand what the expectations of all those different groups are around their impact on decision-making, being innovative, and being able to bring their full self to work, so to speak. And so what I wanted to talk about next is the difference between ageism and generational bias. So we know that those things are going to start to manifest themselves soon as we see things that are happening that are kind of historic in terms of what's going on with COVID-19. So could you talk a little bit about the difference between ageism and generational bias as you're helping employers find talent and helping talent get placed?
So thank you for that way to tee it up. They are separate things, and yet they lay over one another. They are concentric circles. If we talk about it from a talent acquisition standpoint, and I see it both ways. I see ageism up and down, and I see generational bias up and down. So if we're looking at this from the talent acquisition perspective, and we play pretend here, and hiring manager who is a boomer or maybe an older Gen Xer like me, comes to our firm and says, hey, we really want you to, help us hire someone for our marketing department, right? And, we're looking for someone at a manager level with this number of years of experience and these kind of background skills and that kind of stuff, And let's say it's not a digital agency. Let's say it's a law firm or a CPA firm or a financial advisory practice or just a white collar services firm that isn't in the digital media space, the more traditional. And they may say to me, or I have heard in these exchanges with the hiring manager, listen, we're more of a conservative environment. So, the folks that have been, wearing t-shirt and jeans to work, and, that's not going to work here. We need collared shirts every day. And, they coming in and leaving at different times of day, and, having, Facebook up or Instagram or something while they're working, like, we're heads down here. And, they're talking about a generation, and they are categorizing certain people without speaking to it directly. But what they're telling me without telling me is, look, the folks that come in here that are millennials don't fit, because the things that they may have experienced in a different work setting, maybe at a high-tech software company, right, that was cooler and hipper, right? They're not going to get that here. And so we can present those candidates to them, Kurt, and we will present the best available talent for the job, period. But I know when they see those profiles and they go look at them on LinkedIn and see their age, that there's already a hurdle for that candidate to clear,
right,
that they may not clear. Client will say, really not as much experience as I was looking for. Or I wanted somebody that had a little bit more HubSpot. Mm-hmm. But I know why we ended up where we did with that candidate getting disqualified. And it had to do with a lot of what they said. Is that's more of a generational bias. And yet, because of it, it has an ageism spin, because it's like the younger person isn't going to come in here and fit in with us older, more conservative people. On the flip side, when I may be working for that high-tech company, and, there's not a soul in there who's, over 35 years of age. And, in those conversations, they may say, hey, you know what, we need somebody to come in and, be a solutions architect, and we need to have about this many years of experience and this background, and know the SQL and some other stuff. And, just so we're pretty young here, and, we do the kind of company flag football thing. And, we're on the last day of the quarter, we may pull out a card table and celebrate big wins, by doing, some tequila shots. And, just folks who, our older generation just really haven't fit in here. Culturally, it hasn't worked. And so, we want to interview the best candidates possible, but, just those people probably haven't worked out before, and it'll be hard for us to consider them. So, whether they're that frank about it or not, I also know in that scenario that I'm going to encounter some hurdles there. Is that because the boomer or the Gen Xer can't do that job? Absolutely not. But it may be that the client, whether the more conservative or more new age environment, may have made a decision that human persona is not going to fit in here, and so they can't. And when they're paying me a fee to go and find them someone, they're really expecting me to go and get them what they've asked me for, as opposed to have me instruct them or try to constructively at that moment in time be the guy that comes in and helps them with some kind of a cultural, attitudinal, or structural internal repair.
Right. So how do you manage that? So you certainly have this, you want to do what the client is asking you to do, which is to find, here's a profile of who we want. But you also have a sense of that person may not be the right fit, and there are some other opportunities for you to bring someone else in who on a long-term basis may be a better fit. And so how do you have that dialogue with an organization to get them to start to shift their behavior a little bit from finding the perfect resume based on what they already think, based on the biases that they already have, to something that's ultimately going to be best for them in the long run?
So sometimes I'm dealing with a CEO, founder, and best case scenario, if I'm going to have some influence in that moment, is that either A, it's someone I've had a relationship with and I've already got some trust and traction, or I've been referred in by someone else who has that trust and traction. And so by default, I'm a trusted resource at that point. And they do take some value in the consulting advice that I will provide. And as these conversations unfold and as I've had these dialogues over the years, I'm able to say, hey, listen, in my experience, such and such, I understand where you're coming from. Let me tell you about a recent situation I just encountered where we were kind of able to counteract that and show this client that, although they felt this way, because we as the external third party are able to, dig in deep on the screen and ask a lot of questions and pull out personality profile, persona. We presented to that client a case why this person could fit into their culture. These are the reasons why, because we interviewed them from that scope. And so if I can turn them, that CEO or that founder, it's because I can give them a story or a guide or some experience around another event that's similar. And it only is going to happen because they're looking at me as a trusted subject matter expert. Flip side, when I recruit and work very closely with human resources professionals and or talent acquisition professionals, you mentioned earlier about SHRM, right? I've been a SHRM member for a decade, very active in Raleigh Metro. SHRM, was the president of the Raleigh Metro chapter in 2018. I've never been an HR professional, but I've worked with HR professionals for my entire 22-year career. So I can have a very high-level dialogue with an HR professional. Most of the time, it's about they're encountering the same hurdle too. They're fighting that fight as well with their hiring managers or their leadership. And so sometimes they can use me as that one additional piece of leverage to crack that door open wide enough to say, hey, listen, this guy agrees with what I've been telling you. We're paying him to do this. Let's listen to what he has to say and let's open our minds a little bit and consider, alternative candidate profiles.
Okay. So now I want to open it up to the group. And so if you would use the chat feature that you'll see in the bar below and start to just share some things around stories you hear around the different generations in terms of biases. So for example, folks who are older don't know how to use computers. That might be one bias that you hear. Or you may have another bias around a younger group not being committed to their work and delivering high quality work every day. So if you could start to add some of those things that you've heard so that we can add those to the conversation, that would be fantastic. And so, Will, I wanted to jump to talking about what's going to happen now. So we're in COVID-19 and we're facing high unemployment. And so there are a lot of folks who are going to be older or younger trying to find roles in the new economy. So could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that some of those folks may face as they're trying to find a new role? And then also to talk about some of the biases that employers could guard against so that they're making the right smart hiring decisions.
So yes, and what I'd like to do, Kurt, is to give you a quick snapshot of what I was dealing with for the last many, many, many months before COVID, because I think that perspective will help. What was I encountering prior to this pandemic and its impact on what do I see coming? And I'm also going to draw on some of my experience from like 2008, 9, and 10, where I went through that recession as well in this industry and kind of how, what that job market was like. So I'm going to pull all that together for you. Last several months before the middle of March. We were in a very fast-moving, healthy, and robust job market. We had, unemployment rate hovering around 3%. I mean, statistically amazing and really statistically unhealthy, almost too low for the kind of movement that you want to see. And the challenges and pressure that puts on companies who are trying to acquire talent and recruiters, whether they're internal or external, trying to do their jobs, it's just really, really hard to, get enough applicant volume, get enough candidate volume, and to really, find the folks that you want to bring on board, because there's just not as many people looking in those marketplaces. The interesting thing that was happening, though, and was not getting better, getting worse, in the face of that, you would think that unemployment very low, talent acquisition very challenging, let's open the aperture with regard to the types of people we would consider. But what was actually happening to me was I was getting squeezed by clients saying, yeah, so we're going to hire for this position, and let's pretend this job description that you and I are talking about, Kurt, has 10 boxes on it, right? 10 boxes to check. And we want all 10 of these boxes checked. And so go find us that, pink and purple striped unicorn, please, Will. And quite truthfully, if I wasn't able to check 9 or 10 of those boxes, it was very, very hard to get candidates in for interview processes and to get them hired, because it was much more in that moment in time about depth of specificity and, specialization of skill set, as opposed to breadth of experience and, entire career. Why do I bring that up? Well, that lends itself to our conversation about ageism and that impact on the hiring market, because the most challenged facet of the job market prior to COVID, those people that I talked to the most and was able to assist the least, tended to be 50 plus, tended to have very broad experience across career, tended to be mid-management and above, and tended to have a very, very talented skill set when you added it all together. But they weren't necessarily a subject matter expert in that one thing that they really needed to be super good at right now. And so they were getting beat out for jobs by younger talent that was a specialization, much more siloed in one particular thing. Even though Kurt has done a whole bunch of stuff and could come in and do this job and learn it pretty quickly and be excellent, we were in a job market where, they wanted to hire the plug and play free agent that was already highly skilled at that and required a whole lot less ramp. So job market getting tighter, but actually hiring requirements getting more limiting. And that's the crunch that we were in pre-COVID. Okay.
Right.
Now we've got 20 plus million unemployed. And, we've got a very slow and unpredictable, unstable job market where not a lot of companies are hiring quickly, not a lot of companies are hiring at all. And, the folks that I talked to before this change, that 50 bracket plus, are now even more terrified as they either A, continue to be unemployed, or B, find themselves unemployed and are splashed down in a market where there's increased volume of competition, a whole lot more noise and a whole lot more static out there.
Right. So let's
jobs to target.
Let's dig into that fear a little bit more. So I think that's something that is underpinning all the things that we're facing right now, is I think fear across the board. And so could you talk a little bit about what you're seeing as you're talking to folks who are looking for their next role, and how fear plays into that, both out of the employer as well as the side of the folks who are seeking jobs across the spectrum. So how does that look for somebody who's a younger employee or a younger prospect trying to find a role? How does that manifest itself for older folks? And then how are companies thinking about this in terms of fear?
Yeah, for the younger folks, right, younger generation, for people approximately 32 and below, they've never experienced a down job market. I mean, they were graduating from college and entering the job market around the time the economy was starting to recover, and they've never not been in demand. So when I'm talking to the younger generation right now that may be, millennial or Gen Z, it's like, what is this landscape? I'm laid off. Like, I've never had to look for a job before. People came to get me. So it's really about, I don't even know what to do. How do I go about this? And getting them to understand how to utilize resume and LinkedIn and the tools that are available to them to actually search the job market instead of LinkedIn being more of just kind of a social tool. If we go back to that older generation that I'm talking to now, and I had a kind of very apropos conversation with a gentleman earlier today who's in that 50 plus, who finds himself unemployed for the first time in a while and in the midst of this job market. And he said, yeah, I'm baffled because, I'm not technologically savvy. I really don't know how to utilize LinkedIn and the tools that are available to me. And I apply for these jobs and I never hear back. And is it just this internet black hole and there's these, cyber, persona robot things that disqualify my resume? Do I ever get in front of a human being? And I think I can do this, this, and this, and it would be great, but no one's hearing me. And I look at his resume and his LinkedIn profile, and the things that he says he can do or want to do aren't even represented in his job titles or in the way he presents himself online. So it's a skills issue. It's this is new. I've never experienced this before. Fear for the older generation. It's like, now I'm swimming in a pond with a bunch of other people to compete with, and I already felt like I was at a disadvantage. And now I know how to utilize these tools to find a position, and how do I differentiate myself? So it's definitely right now there's fear everywhere. And what I'm trying to do with my time when I talk to and counsel people is, whether it's younger generation or older, or, you and me or anybody else, talking to them about how they utilize technology to look for positions, how to maximize LinkedIn, reviewing their resume with them, connecting them to people who are career coaches and can counsel them on interview skills and can help them redo their LinkedIn profile and their resume. But it's also about, talking to them about utilizing the network and understanding that connectivity is king, and that, you need to have an approach beyond just applying externally. You also need to be reaching out to me or Kurt Merriweather or other people who are connected in the marketplace and get their advice and guidance and input on who to connect to and how to get seen. Because one of the trump cards, Kurt, for ageism or generational bias or any of those things is the trusted friend handoff. And if I go to CEO X and I say, hey, listen, I know that you would not consider this candidate as an external applicant, but let me tell you why you should stop and read this profile and talk to this person, because I think that they're a dynamo and here's why, right? And I can name off some things that I know are check boxes for this particular executive and get that person a conversation where they probably wouldn't have gotten it otherwise.
Right. So I want to jump into that point in particular. One of the questions that came through the chat was around, we've talked a lot about stereotypes of different generations. How do we solve some of the challenges that we see when we're trying to understand each other better? And so I think you're starting to lay out some of those things around how we do that. So you talked about connectivity. Could you expand on that a little bit more and then talk about, how do we solve these barriers that employers may be not looking at the right folks because they have specific biases? How do we break those barriers down?
Wow, great question. I think that we still have an old school mentality when it comes to how we start a job search. And by we, I mean employer. We have a job description and we have a vision. This is the person that we want, and they need to fit these parameters. And sometimes that can be colored by the person who had the job before. Maybe they were great, and it's like, we just want another one of those. We want another Jackie. Or they did not do a good job. We definitely don't want a Bobby. So it's about fitting the recruiting process into this box and finding this, prescribed thing that perfectly fits the recipe. And if it doesn't quite taste like what we expected it to, then, on to the next. I mean, I've been on, employee hunts 6 months or longer because of the stereotypes or the biases or the generational decisions or the ageism or the other thing that's impacting how the hiring manager is looking at the recruiting process and the candidate pool, oftentimes based on resume and the scoring system that may be tied to the applicant tracking technology that they're using, and saying, yeah, you know what, like, I'll wait for someone who, looks, maybe the bias is they want someone like them. It's like, look, I just want to hire someone like myself that's got all this experience and really has muscles here, here, and here. And, I've done a great job here. It's just about hiring another me. So I believe that we get beyond some of that stuff if we focus on the recruiting and talent acquisition process with a diversity and inclusion lens and say, okay, here's what we want. Here's what we have or haven't had in the past. And let's consider different backgrounds and different profiles and different cultures. And let's interview not just those few pink and purple unicorns that wander by, which is rare, but let's interview some other creatures as well and see if through those conversations, we might be able to change our mindset about what can and can't work and what will and won't happen. You and I were talking before we launched this, though, about one of the things that is an impact on this as well that cannot be excluded. And that is the fact that we tend to be a market powered by small business. And one of the things that small business can struggle with very frequently is the combo, the 1-2 punch of onboarding and training. And so sometimes that stereotyping or generational bias or ageism piece that comes with trying to make that perfect hire that's part of that mix is really because we know that if we don't hire a plug and play free agent for this role, that we probably are going to struggle to onboard them successfully and or train them well to be successful. And then when that implodes, we have turnover, we have a bad employee experience. The shrapnel, that blowback from that damages, some of our internal structure, and it can be a mess. So that's a factor as well.
Right. So to summarize, there are a few things you talked about. So first, this idea of the trusted friend interaction or referral. So that helps to break down barriers. If I know someone can be recommended and they come through a specific path, but that person happens to be different than what I was thinking about, then I'll probably listen.
Yes.
Being connected, being able to change your mindset are key things that we want to make sure that we're thinking through as we're trying to go through the hiring process. And the other thing that I would add to that is this idea of proximity. So a lot of times you have an idea about someone, but when you spend time with them across generations, then you learn something new. So whether it's, reverse mentoring, so you might have someone who knows technology and you don't, being able to be paired with that kind of a person. So those are some of the things that, we've talked about before that can help to break down the barriers that exist among some of the generations. And so, how else would you recommend getting organizations to change their mindsets about what you just said? How do I stop looking for the purple or pink unicorn to finding someone that I know I can bring into my organization and they can be successful? And hopefully that reduces the time to search and they'll stay longer.
Well, I think we were in such a rapid growth, such a, quick moving hiring setting with a lot of pressure for a long time. And that was great, right? But it came with trappings. And it's like, let's get the job out there. Let's get it going. Let's get them in here. And not a lot with the clients that I deal with of analysis and thought around, hey, is what we're doing correct? So now that we all have a little bit more time to be thoughtful about our hiring processes and our onboarding strategy and those types of things, I have worked with companies before that prior to them taking that job description out of the oven and saying that it's done and starting a job search, they had a committee that met to talk about the role and the need. And okay, so how homogenous do we look? And are we bringing in, fresh ideas and thought, or are we just hiring, the buddy that looks like the buddy that was, the other buddy, and we're just kind of mirroring one another? Having companies sit down and analyze how they look internally, and how they want to look externally, and is it all about checking these 10 boxes on the job description, or do we need some diversity of input and thought, and do we need a different voice in this org right now? And maybe this position in this particular department is the time where we can try to get a little bit creative. So I think it's about not just hitting the recruit button again and saying, give me another one of those, but it's about analyzing who we are, who we say we are, where we want to go, and do we need more voices in the room? I've been on boards and committees, and I've done a lot of volunteer leadership, and the best boards I've ever been on, no different than this, what you and I are talking about with this hiring committee, were those that it wasn't just a musical chairs of different board members. Well, I'll be the secretary this year, and you can be the head of programs this year, and just moving the same 6 to 10 people around. But you actually succession plan, tried to bring in, younger generations and different modes of thought. And you, as a result, you diversified the board and really changed the look and feel of the org on a fairly regular basis. That's how you advance. That's how you reflect the market. That's how you hear the market. And there was one particular organization I worked with, we were having a membership issue. We were having membership attrition because the members were tired of hearing the same old thing. But they weren't going to hear the same old thing because there was the same old leadership with the same old thought, saying the same old stuff to each other. You can't have a new idea about a new flavor if you're all drinking red Kool-Aid. Like, it ain't going to happen. When we brought in new voices that represented the membership and advanced them, and they said, well, listen, here's what everybody says that they want. And then we started to change the way that we reflected our message out to our membership. We changed the programmatic content and quality of what we were providing to them. It got better. And so that's an analogy, I think, that applies to the way that you go about hiring.
That's exactly right. So what I want to do is shift to Q&A. And there's a good question that came in.
Only easy. Only easy. That was our deal.
This is a warm-up. This is a warm-up question.
Okay, good.
So the question is, how do you think about building personal referrals? And as you're thinking about building those personal referrals, how do you do that and at the same time build a multi-generational network to do that?
Wow. How do you build personal referrals? I'm looking at that question here on the chat box too. And what recommendations do you have for building a multi-generational network? So one, the greatest tool for me from a speed of network building has been LinkedIn, to be sure. And I'm gonna harken back to the way the world was before mid-March, particularly as it relates to networking. I was intentional about getting involved in chambers of commerce. I was intentional about getting involved in SHRM, the professional association that I impacted the most in my career. I was intentional about getting involved in nonprofits and trying to get involved in fundraising and volunteer leadership there. I was intentional about the broadening of my network, because as and as some of the folks who are here today listening may know, I've been doing software technology and high growth kind of startup staffing for 15 years now. I got a good network there, and I go to those meetup groups, but I can't just be that guy with that network if I'm going to help the greater community. So I got involved in SHRM, and I got involved in the Raleigh Chamber and the Morrisville Chamber and other organizations, and I got involved in helping raise money for Wake Med and Haven House Services. I diversified my network intentionally by getting involved in different types of organizations that I knew would expose me to other spheres of influence and other leadership opportunities and other influencers in completely different industry segments. And as a result of that, I got access to different levels of leadership, different generations, and it would everything from the 25-year-old volunteer that's helping with marketing to the 67-year-old board president who is a high-level commercial real estate executive. And we're all sitting in the same room, and we're all fired up about the same cause. So it doesn't matter if you're 25 or 75. If you are rallying around the same cause and you're all passionate about that particular thing, ageism and generational bias disappears. And so that can be applied to the workplace as well. If we're all fired up about the same cause and the same mission for this company, then it really shouldn't matter if you're 75 or 25 or anything else, because we're all rallying for the same reason.
Right. So having a passion around that cause helps to create this unity. And so one of the questions that came in is around assumptions and addressing assumptions around generational bias, and how do you combat those things as they come in? And so who's responsible for it in an organization, and how do you do it?
Well, I was fortunate, I have been in recruiting for a long time, and I've been, networking with and volunteering alongside, very, very forward-thinking, HR professionals for, a couple of decades. So, I knew what I wanted to build when I built it, and I knew why I wanted to do it a certain way. When I've, encountered folks who haven't had that kind of exposure, it's really, they got to be open to the counsel. And I've got to say, look, you're telling me right now that you're struggling, either recruiting talent or retaining talent. And have you really analyzed why? Do you understand the why? Why has it been hard? I'm looking at your compensation, it's market. I'm looking at your job description, it's very reasonable. But as I walk through the office building, here's what I feel. It's really quiet. No one's smiling. No one's getting up and moving around. There's no energy in here. So someone comes in for an interview and they feel that, they're probably not going to come back. Or someone is here and unhappy and interview somewhere else, and it seems like Shangri-La as compared to where they are, then they're probably going to be very easy to tug away even for the same money because they want to enjoy what they're doing every day. So, it takes progressive leadership, and it takes someone who's willing to, look at themselves and look at their own organization and be open to change. Sometimes, Kurt, I've had to walk away from business because I knew that regardless of how loud I screamed, they weren't going to hear me. And I couldn't, in good conscience, put somebody in an environment where I knew it was going to be a bad experience, because I got to think about my brand and my reputation too.
Right. And so there are cases where you have different, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, where depending on the nature of where that company is, so especially in growth mode, we talked about this need for gray hair.
Yeah.
We both have it.
Yes.
And so are there cases where some of the stereotypes around different generations are positive, where that is necessary for a specific role, depending on who you're trying to reach or attract?
Yes. So before I hit the gray hair piece, it made me think about a recent hiring process that we worked on for a very traditional law firm. And because they had a progressive HR person who the lead partner was willing to give the reins, we intentionally helped her hire an earlier career diverse candidate who brought some different perspectives to a marketing specialist job, who had skills that the lead partner at this law firm, couldn't even imagine having, but was also going to be able to go in there and, implement some change and influence some opinions, but also just completely change the complexity of the firm just by being in the building. So that's a positive. I got another client that's 4 founders, software company, and they're all late millennial, and they said, "Look, we can't hire another one of us. We don't need to hear one more voice that's just like ours. Please, for this senior level position, go find us somebody with gray hair and wisdom, because A, we need that. But B, we also recognize that we are dealing with ageism and bias when we're meeting with C-level executives to try and sell our product, or when we're meeting with investors to try and raise money, because we don't look weathered enough to appear to carry the senior clout to earn their trust and respect." Can you hear me?
Were you there?
Yes.
Okay. Apologies, a little difficulty with my headset there.
It's all right. Did you get all of what I said?
I did. So the last question I want to close with is around Gen Z.
Okay.
And so there are folks that recognize that there's a completely different thought process around the Gen Z generation, because that's the one generation where technology has always been available to them as a group. the way that Gen Z has been educated is different. And so how can companies get ready for this new wave of employees that's about to start to show up on their doorsteps?
Wow. Well, you know, what's interesting is there's a lot of companies that we work with, Kurt, that, you know, they were not even thinking that they could embrace a remote workforce. And yet the world said, you've got no choice. So they had to. So a lot of companies have had in the last 60 days to rapid fire get ready for technology in a way they never had to before. Because nothing has ever impacted any of us that forced our hand in this way. So they're implementing at a very rapid pace, a lot of companies, you know, video conferencing and remote, you know, technological setup, things that have been part of the way Gen Z was raised. And they've grown up on tech. They've grown up on, you know, interacting with people this way. I got Gen Z kids. They don't call each other on the phone. They get in video chats like this. And they may have their iPad and their phone and their laptop and music all going at the same time. And they can multitask in that way. I can't. I can't even like have the TV going in the background and write something coherent. Like I'm absolutely linear. I mean, just the littlest noise and I'm done. So, but they're so used to all that. I think that it's just about companies understanding what they just swallowed and seeing that they can do it and listening to the workforce that's on the way. And rather than saying, this is how we do it here, saying, what do you need to be successful? And trying to build the organizations that are inclusive, not only from a diversity and all those other standpoints, but just from a modernization standpoint, so that they don't miss on talent because somebody else moved faster than them with regard to technological access.
Right. So with that, I think we're going to leave it there. So we've come to our stopping point. Will, thank you so much today for your insights and wisdom as we think about how we combat assumptions around multi-generational diversity. If you want to learn more about implementing successful D&I programming, check out our online diversity and inclusion course, Diversity Beyond the Checkbox, which covers this topic and many other fundamental topics that are important in terms of establishing a blueprint for creating a diversity and inclusion practice in your organization. To learn more about the diversity movement, visit thediversitymovement.com to learn more. To learn more about Will and his services, visit barfieldrevenueconsulting.com. We're going to make this recording available for you tomorrow, so look out for the email and you can refer this and share it to folks in your network. Thank you so much for being here today. And Will, thanks again for your time, and look forward to all the things that we'll be able to do as we advance diversity and inclusion work.
I love what you guys are doing, Kurt. I'm grateful to you, not just for the time and audience today, but for what the diversity movement is all about and what you're championing. And I'm thrilled to be connected to you.
Outstanding. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.